As I get older, there are fewer and fewer things that I can recall vividly from my youth. Actually, I don't remember what I had for breakfast today. Yes, I do. But often there are things that are more traumatic, I guess, that I do remember vividly, like when my twin brother and I were quite young and we were jumping up and down on the sofa in our living room, and I got off balance and hit the radiator with my head, and my head split open, and lots of blood. I had to go to the hospital, get stitches, and still have horrible memories and visions of emergency rooms. There's happy memories as well. This is opening week of baseball. I remember very, very well. I was 7 years old. Went to my first White Sox game at Comiskey Park. And I remember coming up that ramp. It was a night game. And seeing it, I'd never seen anything like it. You know, that field, like brilliant emerald green under those lights. And seeing men that I'd only seen on television warming up. My dad teaching me how to keep score. It was probably that very same year, I was certainly close to that age, I remember as well going to the AMVETS Hall on a Sunday afternoon. We only lived 3 blocks away, so we walked, and there was a long line of people stretched out from the AMVETS Hall. And I expect most of them had just come from church. It was summer, and we were all coming to get our vaccine for polio. It was a scary thing. My good friend Ricky Casera had contracted polio, and he was a cripple for most of his youth. And I knew it could kill children, especially. My mom and dad are both gone now, but I remember how they would talk about that time and how it was for them in the early days as a family, the fear that they had every summer that one of their boys would contract polio. And until the vaccine came along, they didn't know what to do. And how do you keep young kids away from a park and the swimming pool in the summer? You know, as a baby boomer, it seems to me that our lives have been punctuated by epidemics. Polio when I was a child, HIV/AIDS when I was a young adult, and now COVID-19. They were all scary events, and they were all the types of events that can leave scars. And I suspect that there were many people back in the 60s, as there were in the 80s and now, people that say that these epidemics are somehow a punishment from God. Maybe these people didn't say it as much during the polio epidemic because so many of the victims were children. But if they didn't say it then, how can they say that during the AIDS epidemic or this pandemic that somehow God is punishing us? It merely instills fear. And fear is never what the people of God need to be repeating. It is the gospel of love. The gospel of love that we are called to proclaim. We may well ask ourselves, where is God among this fear and suffering? We can think of Ukraine, certainly at this time. Has God forgotten us? This is a question that is as old as humanity. Why do we suffer? Why does God permit suffering? This is the most important week for us to ask this question because it is the week when we receive the most powerful answer that we could ever hope for. In a moment, we will recite together the basic principles of our faith. We call it the Creed. And it begins, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. The Father Almighty. God is the mightiest of all forces. God can do anything. God could stop evil. God could stop the bad things that happen to people. But sometimes God doesn't. And when do we see the most extraordinary example of this reality? In the reading that we just heard, we hear that his only Son was crucified. Why didn't God stop it? Of all the bad things that could happen to people, why would a father not stop the death of his own son? Because from it, the greatest of all goods was accomplished. We were redeemed. We all were redeemed by the death of Jesus. Evil exists in this world because God gave us the great gift of a free will. God doesn't force us to love God or others. God could do that as well, but God desires that we freely love. And that is what God deeply desires for each of us. It was the great commandment that Jesus gave us, to love. When we allow fear to take over our lives, another course is laid open for us. For when we act out of fear, we inevitably act out of anger and hatred. And that certainly is not the way of Jesus. Let us be clear as well that God doesn't cause epidemics in order to fortify us or teach us some sort of lesson. That is not the way of a loving father. The way of a loving parent is to help us learn and grow from the realities of our lives. And that's God's way. None of us can know what will come from any of these pandemics that we've experienced or the war in Ukraine, but I believe in God the Father Almighty. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son. And I believe in the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, and life everlasting. When we can fully hold to these beliefs, then we grow in the trust of our loving Father. And then we need have no fear of what is to come.